I personally made Canon a lot of money. I sold many of their cameras and lenses back in the day. The Canon Rebel XTI, in Europe it was called the 400D, sold like hotcakes, and it was by far the best-selling DSLR in our store in Canada. It was an easy sell because it usually was on sale and quite a bit cheaper than competing models. Canon always had good prices for bundles with a telephoto lens and was a reputable name that even beginners knew. Most importantly for many people, the megapixel count on the Canon cameras were higher than most of the competition. Plus, they were a very good camera and therefore easy to recommend by our staff. Although I'm very familiar with them through my job at the time, I've never owned a single Canon DSLR or lens up to 2023. That's because I always shot with Nikon and Pentax DSLRs, Fuji and Sony mirrorless cameras after that. However, a few months ago when I saw a local ad for a Canon Rebel XT for $40 with kit lens, I couldn't resist. A Rebel XT that would be a 350D for Europeans. Let's have a look at this 8 megapixel DSLR from 2005 and how it holds up today in 2024. What results can you expect? Hi and welcome back to Herb's Vintage Tech. So what results can we expect from a camera from 2005 in 2024? Well, not surprisingly, the same results as in 2005 and better. Believe it or not, in 2005 the world was full of magazines, books, newspapers, catalogs, posters and photographs, and they all have been taken with something like this or similar. Just by this fact alone, I know that this camera is capable of excellent results. I'm talking about still photography. So no, this camera does not take videos. Aww. Back in 2005, most cameras featured CCD sensors like the Pentax K100D and the Nikon D40 I previously reviewed. The Canon 350D here is different. Very early on, Canon put CMOS sensors in their DSLRs. Today, CMOS sensors are the standard in pretty much every modern camera. CMOS sensors are quite a bit cheaper to produce, and generally their noise performance is better compared to their CCD counterparts. It's a bit hard to explain the different look of a CCD sensor compared to a CMOS, but I will try. Remember, what I'm saying is in regard to raw images. If you shoot JPEGs, you get whatever the camera and its internal algorithms deliver, which is in most cases only a fraction of the quality the camera is capable of. Images taken with a CCD sensor tend to look gentler, less contrasty. The colors react to input in a less punchy way. Especially pastel colors are rendered more neutral. During the time mainly CCD sensors were produced, manufacturers have tuned their sensors to the look of analog films at the time, because a lot of SLR photographers still shot their analog equipment, were satisfied with it, and wanted something similar in digital. In addition, CCD sensors are extremely well suited for black and white images as they closely match the tonal range and in some cases the grain of the black and white film. CMOS sensors on the other hand can produce punchy colors and contrast with less input in post-production. With earlier CMOS sensors like this one has to be careful not to lose details in the shadows if you increase the contrast. Highlights are a bit easier to work with on CMOS sensors. They don't blow out as early as on the CCDs. So while I tend to shoot CCD sensor cameras with an exposure compensation of -0.3 to -0.7, I usually leave cameras with CMOS sensors at 0. Once you shoot with a Canon 350D, you will see what I'm talking about. The images out of it are quite pleasing, colorful, and with a lot of contrast. Noise performance is very good. The images are very usable up to 1600 ISOs, and with modern noise reduction software you will be pleased with the results. This is also thanks to the relatively low 8 megapixel count of the Rebel XT. Low megapixel counts are not always a disadvantage, as it makes the individual pixels bigger. Bigger pixels in turn can collect more light, and more light means more information. That's why to this day, many proud new owners of the upgraded cameras sometimes turn really quiet about the noise performance of the newer equipment with higher megapixel count when they find out that the newer camera is actually worse than the older model. This was the case almost 20 years ago with these older cameras as well. The 350D here has actually better performance compared to the 10 megapixel Canon 400D after it, and the 6 megapixel Nikon D40 compared to the 10 megapixels D40X, D60 or D3000. Sometimes less is more. Up to 400 ISOs, you will have a hard time telling this almost 20-year-old camera apart from a modern one. That being said, between 800 and 1600 ISOs, I prefer the noise characteristics of the 6 megapixel CCD sensor from Pentax and Nikon. But that's a taste thing. The camera has a dedicated ISO button. When you press it, it brings up an ISO menu on the screen, and by scrolling up and down, you can choose your ISOs. From a modern point of view, this could have been done quicker and better. But you have to keep in mind that these DSLR cameras from the mid-2000s are what I call transitional cameras from analog film to digital, and quick ISO selection wasn't on the manufacturer's to-do list yet. Canon's approach isn't bad though, and overall to change ISOs you will have one button less to press compared to the Pentax K100D. It's also worth mentioning that the base ISO on the 350D here is 100 compared to 200 on its 6 megapixel CCD competition. This is an advantage in some situations, a disadvantage in others. It means that the sensor is less sensitive to light compared to the 6 megapixel CCD sensor of mentioned other cameras, and in order to get the cleanest image, if that's important to you, you have to shoot with 100 ISO, and with a kit lens at this setting, you will run out of light quickly. Currently, the only native Canon lens I have is the 18 to 55mm kit lens it came with when it was new. It has to be said that this particular Canon lens was a bit of a dog, meaning it was one of the worst kit lenses from any manufacturer. The lens itself wasn't necessarily bad, but there was a large amount of sample variation between one lens and another. Some of the kits we sold were returned by very unsatisfied customers, as the image quality was not what they expected from a DSLR. Some of these kit lenses were soft throughout their entire zoom range. Some had weaknesses at the wide angle, others at the telephoto range. It is my theory that this particular kit lens gave a bad name to kit lenses in general. My copy here is actually quite good. It is sharp from 18 to 45mm. Only at the last 10mm the quality falls off a bit, but not bad. From my experience, I would say you would get 1 in 5 like that. It's better than playing in the lottery, but don't be terribly disappointed if your kit lens that comes with a 350D or the 400D has some flaws. It's not the camera's fault, but budget in another lens if you buy a used Rebel XT or XTI in order to get the most out of the camera. My personal favorites are prime lenses, and some Canon primes like the 50mm f1.8 EF can be had for really low prices. I have seen them for $50 or less. I also recommend my favorite focal length, the 35mm equivalent, which in this case would be roughly a 20mm or 24mm lens. You have to keep in mind that Canon APS-C sensors have a 1.6 times crop factor compared to the 1.5 crop factor for other systems. Overall, Canon has so many lenses in any focal length imaginable, old and new, you won't run out of things to try anytime soon. What is also interesting to know is that the Canon DSLR mount has the shortest distance from the sensor to the lens of any of the main DSLR manufacturers. This enables us to use lenses not designed for the system via an adapter. This is not any different than using an adapter to use DSLR lenses on mirrorless cameras. Since I own quite a few vintage Nikon lenses, I got myself an adapter for the Nikon F-mount lenses. Yes, I know it looks weird to have a Nikon lens on a Canon DSLR body, but I love it. Unlike the Nikon D40 or any other Nikon so-called entry-level cameras, the Canon 350D even meters with these lenses. But there is a caveat. When you stop the aperture down, the viewfinder gets dimmer and dimmer as the camera has no way to engage the aperture lever and keep the aperture open. This can be an issue, especially for focusing on an optical screen that's not exactly bright in the first place, even with native lenses. There is an adapter for Pentax lenses as well, but I have not tried it yet. I will provide an update when I get one. Before I show you some more image samples and a little Lightroom editing of a RAW file from the 350D, I would like to give you some more impressions of this camera. As you can see, the screen is quite small, but has something that other cameras lack: an LCD screen for the most common settings. On many cameras, this screen sits on top of the camera. On the 350D, it is located on top of the screen in the back. I like this idea, as I'm a RAW shooter and I use the main screen only for focus confirmation. For that, the screen is okay for me. As a tip, set your screen always at the brightest level on the Rebel XT. It gets very dim very quickly if it's sunny out. Once you set up your camera correctly, you shouldn't need the menu often other than ISO changes. Since these cameras are now almost 20 years old, one thing you have to be aware of when you buy them is the internal clocks that record time and date might not be working correctly anymore. Canon future-proofed their cameras by powering this internal clock by a user-replaceable 2016 button cell battery. Fantastic! The images are stored on the bigger compact flash card standard. The cards are still readily available, but I'm planning on getting an adapter to use micro SD cards. I will report back on which one works. Let's move on and have a look how it is to work on one of the Rebel XT's RAW files in Lightroom 5.7. Alright, I chose this picture here because I think it shows very nicely the difference between the highlights up here that I overexposed a little bit, and then it's a very nice landscape image with some shadows, and I can show you how the old CMOS sensor of this 20-year-old camera reacts to adjustments in the shadow and the highlight areas. So let's set everything to 0 so that we have a good blank canvas in our RAW file. Okay, so here I show you the image was shot with 100 ISO, so the camera's base value on this old CMOS sensor. Yeah, the image was taken with the 18 to 55 kit lens. The first thing we want to do is we want to adjust our exposure a little bit, so we can see we should brighten it up a little bit, like so. And now we have to take care of the contrast a little bit. We have to be careful with these CMOS sensors, they provide a lot of contrast. So next we will take care of the highlights up here. You see they recovered very nicely. I also did the shadows. I added a little bit brightness to the shadow area here, and you see the picture is already taking shape. The whites we can take out a little bit, and the blacks don't need to do a lot. Now we take some clarity, we put some clarity in and some vibrance and some colors with the saturation. I like it a little bit saturated, especially for landscape shots. So let's go down here and take care of the sharpening of the image. This was taken with the kit lens, and it's not the super sharp lens that I'm used to, so I will add a little bit more sharpness on that. So let's add a little bit of radius and the detail, and I think that already looks very nice. This kit lens copy that I have is actually nice and sharp. Don't have any complaints. But let's have a look in the shadow area down here. We see quite a bit of noise developed because I lifted the shadows up, and that's the problem with the older CMOS sensors. They develop noise really quickly, and we have to take care of this. First we have to take the color noise out of it. You see I just have luminance left really here, and I'll take that out here in a little bit. You have to be a little bit careful with taking the luminance noise out, because you lose quite a bit of details with leaves and fine detail, and I don't want that. I'd rather have a little bit luminance noise left and have more detail. So you can see I took a little bit out. Let's do a little bit more, and I think that looks great. Now we see have a little bit of chromatic aberration down here, and Lightroom will take care of this right there. Okay, and now we are ending up, I find, with a decent landscape shot. If you look at the detail, that's quite pleasing. Remember, you are looking at a camera that's bought for $50 or $40. $40 I bought that one. And this is actually a really nice image. I could have taken a little bit of more care of the blown out highlights during the photo shoot, but for now, for the demonstration purpose, I think this is a nice shot. Well, so this concludes this video here. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. Until next time on Herb's Vintage Tech.